Part 1 of 14. The Namikaze household was uncharacteristically quiet, stripped of the warmth that usually followed the red hot-blooded habanero. The Third Great Shinobi War was in its final, agonizing throes, and the village of Konoha was bleeding its best and brightest into the front lines. 4-year-old Naruto stood in the entryway, his small hands balled into fists as he watched his mother check her equipment pouches one last time. "Mommy, please," Naruto said, his voice small but insistent. "I already finished the history scrolls you left. I can even hold the leaf on my forehead for a whole hour now. Can't we go to the training ground? Just for a little bit." Kushina Uzumaki paused, her hand hovering over a seal-impressed kunai. She knelt down, the fatigue of the war etched into the corners of her eyes, and placed her hands on Naruto's shoulders. Her vibrant red hair was pulled back into a practical, high ponytail, and her flak jacket felt cold and stiff under Naruto's touch. "Listen to me, Naruto," she said, her voice softening with a mother's conviction. "The village needs mommy and daddy right now. This is the final push, you know, but I promise you, once the war is done, I'm going to train you myself. We'll work until you're the strongest shinobi to ever live. You'll be a legend that makes the history books look boring." Naruto's lower lip wobbled as he looked up at her. "But you're always gone. Dad is always gone. And I know it's hard," she whispered, pulling him into a brief, tight embrace. She pulled back and tapped his nose with a playful, yet firm, finger. "While we're away, you have to make mommy and daddy proud by keeping up with your studies. Knowledge is just as sharp as a kunai. Naruto, can you do that for us?" Naruto looked at his feet. He didn't want to study more theory or practice calligraphy in an empty house. He wanted to feel the rush of chakra and the pride of her praise. But seeing the weight she was carrying, he gave a slow, reluctant nod. "Good boy," Kushina said, standing up as a knock echoed through the house. "Mikoto-chan is going to watch over you while we're out. Itachi will be here too, so you won't be alone. Be on your best behavior, okay?" She turned toward the door, her silhouette framed by the harsh morning light. As she stepped out to join the conflict, Naruto remained in the quiet hall, the weight of her promise hanging in the air like a debt yet to be paid. Part 2 of 14. The door had barely latched shut behind Kushina when Mikoto Uchiha stepped into the foyer, her presence a calm contrast to the whirlwind of energy Naruto's mother usually left in her wake. At her side stood a young boy, only slightly older than Naruto, with solemn eyes and the quiet poise of someone who had already seen too much of the world. "Come in, Itachi," Mikoto said softly, placing a hand on her son's back before turning her warm gaze toward Naruto. "Hello, Naruto-kun. Your mother told me you've been a very hard worker lately." Naruto managed a small, dutiful nod, though his eyes remained fixed on the door where his mother had disappeared. "I've been reading the scrolls," he muttered. "Mommy says I have to make them proud." Mikoto's expression softened with a flicker of sympathy. She knew all too well the burden placed on the children of the village's icons during times of war. "And I'm sure you are. Why don't you show Itachi where you've been studying? I brought some tea and snacks for you both." The two boys retreated to the small library, a room filled with the scent of old parchment and the heavy silence of a house built for more people than were currently in it. Naruto sat cross-legged on a floor cushion, staring at a diagram of chakra pathways that he had already memorized. Itachi sat opposite him, observing the younger boy with a calculating yet kind curiosity. "You want to be out there," Itachi stated. It wasn't a question. Naruto looked up, surprised by the older boy's bluntness. "Mommy said she'd train me to be the strongest, but she says I have to wait. I don't like waiting." Itachi looked down at his own hands. "The war makes everyone wait for the things they want. But your mother is right about the studies. If you understand the why before the how, you will be ahead of everyone else when the training finally begins." Naruto sighed, resting his chin in his palms. "I guess, but it's lonely. It's like they're already legends, and I'm just here." "Then use this time," Itachi said, his voice holding a maturity that far outstripped his years. "Build your foundation, so that when she finally comes home to teach you, she doesn't find a student. She finds a shinobi. Naruto's eyes sparked at that. The idea of surprising his mother, of showing her he had surpassed even her expectations while she was gone, gave him a sudden, renewed focus. He reached for a heavy book on tactical geography, pulling it toward him with a newfound determination. He would wait. He would study. He would make them see him. Part 3 of 14. 1 year after the war's end, the village of Konoha felt reborn. The tension of the front lines had been replaced by the rhythmic sounds of hammers rebuilding and the laughter of families reunited. For 5-year-old Naruto, the year had been a dream come true. True to her word, Kushina had taken him to the training grounds, teaching him the snap of the wrist required to send a kunai whistling into the center of a wooden target. Minato, despite his growing list of responsibilities, had spent sunrise sessions showing him the spiraling release of a shuriken. His birthday had been a rare moment of brilliance. Jiraiya, the great toad sage, had arrived with a boisterous laugh and a wrapped gift that felt far too heavy for a child. Inside was a spear, shorter than a standard soldier's, but perfectly balanced for Naruto's height, its tip gleaming with polished steel. Tsunade, appearing more somber but equally kind, had handed him a specialized sealing scroll. "Don't lose it," she'd warned with a smirk. "That can hold 50 individual items. A shinobi who is always prepared is a shinobi who lives." But all of that paled in comparison to the heat of the afternoon sun a month later. Naruto stood amidst a sea of people in the village square, his hand firmly gripped in his mother's. High above on the Hokage's balcony, Minato stood draped in the iconic white and red cloak, the hat held firmly in his hands. The third Hokage stood beside him, passing the mantle of leadership to the man who had ended the war. "Look, Naruto!" Kushina cheered, her voice rising above the roar of the crowd. She hoisted him onto her shoulders so he could see better. "Look at your dad. That's the fourth Hokage right there, you know." Naruto cheered until his throat was sore, his small heart swelling with a pride so intense it felt like it might burst. Seeing his father up there, framed by the stone faces of the past leaders, Naruto felt a certainty take root in his soul. This was his family. They were the center of the village, the protectors of the flame. As long as he kept working hard, he would be right there beside them. He didn't see the heavy stacks of paperwork already piling up in the office, or the way the village elders were already pulling at Minato's time. In that moment, Naruto was just a son watching his hero, unaware that the shadow of that balcony was starting to grow very, very long. Part 4 of 14. The transition from hero of the war to Hokage happened faster than Naruto could track. Suddenly, the morning training sessions with his father grew shorter, then rarer, and eventually stopped altogether. The yellow flash was no longer a blur on the training field. He was a silhouette behind a mountain of scrolls in the Hokage Tower. Kushina tried to fill the void, but the responsibilities of being the Hokage's wife and the head of the revitalized Uzumaki affairs in Konoha began to pull at her too. Instead of the training grounds, Naruto found himself spent in the study, the walls lined with heavy, leather-bound volumes. "If you're going to lead one day, you have to know the rules of the game," Kushina told him, piling 4 massive books onto the mahogany desk. Naruto looked at the titles with a sinking feeling. The fundamental laws of the Land of Fire, Konoha Shinobi Statutes, and 2 specific, silver-edged volumes detailing the laws and rights of the Namikaze and Uzumaki clans. "Mom, I thought we were going to practice the spear forms today," Naruto said, his hand hovering over the cool steel of the gift Jiraiya had given him. "I know. Honey, I know." Kushina sighed, smoothing out a stray lock of his blonde hair. "But with your dad in the office, I have to handle the clan alliances. You need to understand who we are and what we owe the village. These books contain the history of our blood. Naruto, study them well. It's for your own good." She kissed his forehead and hurried out, the sound of her footsteps echoing down the hall as she rushed to a meeting with the village council. Naruto sat in the oversized chair, the silence of the house pressing in on him. He opened the first book, Village Laws, and began to read. He learned about the hierarchy of command, the rights of the clan heirs, and the strict protocols of succession. He didn't realize it yet, but as he memorized the laws that protected the status of a clan heir, he was inadvertently studying the very rules that would one day be used to push him aside. For now, he just read, hoping that if he mastered these dry, dusty pages, his parents would finally have a reason to stay home for dinner. Part 5 of 14. The morning sun spilled across the kitchen table in warm, golden slats, chasing away the shadows of the quiet house. For the first time in weeks, the air didn't smell like old parchment or ink. It smelled like home. The sizzle of bacon and the hearty aroma of sausage filled the room, a culinary symphony that had Naruto racing down the stairs with a wide grin. Morning, sunshine. Kushina chirped, her voice light and musical. She was humming an upbeat melody, flipping eggs with a rhythmic grace that suggested she was in the best mood Naruto had seen in years. Minato sat at the head of the table, his Hokage cloak draped over the back of the chair, looking more relaxed than he had since his inauguration. For a blissful hour, the village didn't exist. They ate slowly, laughing as they traded stories. Naruto talked about his progress with the sealing scroll Tsunade had given him, and Minato shared a funny anecdote about a misunderstanding during a council meeting. As the plates were cleared and the tea was poured, Kushina leaned back, her eyes sparkling with a secret she could no longer contain. So, she started, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. I left out the most important part of my day yesterday. I had a long appointment at the hospital with Tsunade-sama. Minato reached over, taking her hand in his expression softening into one of pure, radiant joy. Naruto leaned in, sensing the gravity of the moment. And Naruto asked, his heart racing. And it turns out I'm pregnant. Kushina beamed, her smile stretching from ear to ear. But that's not all. Tsunade confirmed it. It's triplets, Naruto. You're going to be a big brother to 3 little ones. The silence that followed was broken by Naruto's ecstatic shout. He jumped from his seat, his mind racing with images of teaching his siblings how to throw kunai and protecting them in the village. Minato laughed, pulling both his wife and his son into a fierce, jubilant embrace. In that moment, surrounded by the scent of breakfast and the promise of a growing family, Naruto felt like the luckiest boy in the world. He didn't see the triplets as a threat to his place in the house. He saw them as a team, his team. He didn't know that this was the last morning the 3 of them would ever feel like a complete unit. Part 6 of 14. The kitchen was decorated with small, hand-painted banners and a modest cake, a rare sight in a year where the Hokage's schedule usually dictated their lives. Naruto sat between his parents, basking in the warmth of their undivided attention. For the first time since his father took office a year ago, there were no emergency summons, no messengers at the window, and no piles of paperwork. It was October 10th, and for 6 hours, he had been the center of their world. Happy 6th birthday, Naruto, Minato said, his hand resting affectionately on his son's head. Kushina, her belly swollen with the weight of 3 lives, leaned over to kiss his cheek. My big boy, she whispered. 6 years old. You've grown so much this year, you know. The joy of the moment was shattered by a sharp, pained gasp. Kushina's hand flew to the table, her knuckles whitening as she gripped the edge. A pool of water spread across the floorboards. Minato. She choked out, her breath hitching. It's time. Now. The house transformed in an instant. The relaxed atmosphere vanished, replaced by the clinical efficiency of high-ranking shinobi. Minato was on his feet, supporting Kushina with one arm, while signaling for the hidden ANBU guards with a sharp look. I'm coming too, Naruto cried, his heart hammering against his ribs. He reached for his jacket, but his father's hand stopped him, firm and unyielding. No, Naruto, it's too dangerous. The seal is under too much pressure with triplets, Minato said, his voice now that of the Hokage, not the father. I need you to go to Makoto's. Stay there until I send for you. That's an order. Naruto watched them disappear in a yellow flash, leaving him standing alone in a room filled with half-eaten cake and birthday ribbons. The silence was deafening. He didn't linger. He grabbed his cloak and headed for the Uchiha district. Over the past few months, Naruto had become a regular fixture at Makoto's. With his father in the office and his mother struggling through a difficult pregnancy, Naruto had stepped up. He did the grocery runs his mother couldn't manage. He organized the clan scrolls his father was too busy to file. He had become a little adult in a child's body, doing the chores of a man to keep his family's lives from falling apart. When he arrived at the Uchiha estate, Mikoto saw the worry etched into his face and immediately moved into action. She didn't offer empty platitudes. She gave him a task. Naruto can Itachi, Mikoto said, her voice brisk as she handed them a list and a heavy purse. I need a specific set of herbs and supplies for the morning, and the specialized markets on the far side of the village are the only ones that carry them. They close in 40 minutes. She glanced at the clock. It was late, the moon hanging high over the village. I'm timing you. If you hurry, you can make it before they lock the doors. Consider it a test of your speed. Go! Itachi glanced at Naruto, a silent, understanding passing between the two boys. They didn't need to speak. Naruto tightened his sandals, his mind still on his mother in the delivery room, but his body already leaning into the sprint. He had to be fast. He had to be useful. If he couldn't be there for the birth, he would at least be the perfect shinobi his parents expected him to be. Part 7 of 14. The wind whipped through Naruto's blonde hair as he pushed his lungs to their limit. Beside him, Itachi was a blur of focused grace, the Uchiha's mother's purse tucked securely under one arm, while Naruto gripped the grocery list like a sacred scroll. They weren't just running. They were navigating the village as only shinobi could, leaping over sloped rooftops, sliding down clay-tiled eaves, and cutting through narrow, shadowed alleyways that smelled of rain and stone. As they reached the edge of the specialized district, the shopkeeper was already reaching for the heavy wooden shutters. Itachi skidded to a halt at the counter, breathing rhythmically, while Naruto tumbled in just behind him. 3 seconds, Naruto couldn't. Itachi noted quietly, though his eyes held a glimmer of respect for the younger boy's pace. Naruto bent over, hands on his knees, gasping for air but wearing a defiant grin. I'll catch you. Next time, he wheezed. They quickly gathered the herbs and supplies Mikoto had requested, the shopkeeper hurrying to finish the transaction so he could head home. With the bags packed and balanced between them, the two boys began their trek back toward the Uchiha district. The village was eerily peaceful, the moonlight turning the streets into a silver labyrinth. Then the world shattered. A roar, so primal and massive it felt like it was tearing the very fabric of the atmosphere, erupted from the center of the village. The ground buckled beneath their feet, sending Naruto stumbling against a stone wall. What was Naruto began, but the words died in his throat. From thin air, as if a nightmare had manifested into reality, the nine-tailed fox appeared. Its fur was the color of a setting sun, and its 9 tails lashed out like whips of pure destruction, leveling entire city blocks in a single sweep. The air grew heavy with a suffocating, malicious chakra, a red, burning pressure that made Naruto's skin crawl and his heart seize with terror. The Kyuubi, Itachi whispered, his voice uncharacteristically sharp. He immediately dropped into a defensive stance, his eyes narrowing. Naruto stared at the towering beast, his mind flashing back to his mother in the delivery room and his father on the Hokage balcony. They were supposed to be safe. Everything was supposed to be perfect. But as the fox opened its maw to let out another world-shaking roar, Naruto realized that the promise of a peaceful night was gone. The war he thought had ended had just come to his front door. Part 8 of 14. The sky had turned a hellish shade of crimson as the Kyuubi's chakra saturated the air. Naruto and Itachi didn't look back. They sprinted toward the Uchiha compound, their hearts hammering against their ribs. Itachi's thoughts were a frantic blur of Mikoto and the infant Sasuke, while Naruto's mind screamed for his mother and the three siblings who were supposed to be born into a world of peace. As they skidded around a corner into a narrow alleyway, they saw a young girl, paralyzed by terror as the ground groaned beneath her. "Over here! Run!" Itachi shouted. The girl stumbled toward them, her eyes wide and glassy. I can't find my parents," she sobbed. "What's your name?" Naruto asked, grabbing her hand to pull her along. "Izumi," she managed to choke out. "Stay with us, Izumi. We're going to the compound," Naruto commanded, his voice surprisingly steady for a 6-year-old facing the end of the world. When they finally reached the Uchiha estate, Naruto's stomach dropped. The elegant gates were splintered, and Mikoto's home was partially collapsed, a victim of the shockwaves. They burst inside to find Mikoto unconscious on the floor, her body curled protectively around a crying Sasuke. "Auntie Mikoto," Naruto cried, checking her pulse. She was alive, but pinned by the weight of the situation and the exhaustion of the chaos. They were just children. They couldn't lift a grown woman, let alone carry her and a baby through a crumbling village. Itachi spotted a long, flat section of a wooden wall that had been sheared off. "There! Help me!" They slid the wood under Mikoto, creating a makeshift litter. But the weight was still too much for Itachi and Izumi alone. Naruto, who had spent the last year pushing his physical limits to impress his parents, stepped in. "Itachi, take the front and hold Sasuke. Izumi, take the back." Naruto barked, sliding himself underneath the center of the board. He braced his shoulders against the wood, his small legs trembling as he took the brunt of the weight from below. "On 3, lift." With Naruto acting as the central pillar, they moved as a unit, rushing through the smoke-filled streets toward the designated shelters. Suddenly, a massive, jagged beam from a nearby building was flung into the air by a lash of a red tail, hurtling directly toward them. "Watch out!" Naruto roared from beneath the litter. Itachi didn't hesitate. Still balancing the front of the board and clutching Sasuke to his chest, he channeled his chakra with a precision that defied his age. With his free hand, he blurred through signs. "Fire style, great fireball jutsu." A roaring sphere of flame erupted, incinerating the debris into harmless ash before it could touch them. The sudden, intense heat and the flare of chakra acted like a jolt to Mikoto's senses. Her eyes snapped open, her Sharingan spinning instinctively as she took in the sight of her son and Naruto struggling to carry her to safety. "Itachi, Naruto," she gasped, her voice hoarse from the dust. "Put me down. I can walk." Part 9 of 14. The moment they lowered the board, Mikoto tried to stand, her hand immediately flying to her temple. Her fingers came away stained with dark, crimson blood from a jagged gash where a support beam had struck her during the initial collapse. She swayed, the world spinning in her vision. "Auntie, don't," Naruto cried, reaching out to steady her. "You're hurt." I'm fine, Naruto-kun. Just a bit dizzy," Mikoto insisted, her voice gaining a sharp, commanding edge that forced the dizziness aside. She looked at the 3 children, Itachi holding a now silent Sasuke, Izumi trembling but standing, and Naruto, whose shoulders were bruised from the weight he'd just carried. "We cannot stay here." We moved toward the outer shelters. "Now!" They sprinted in the opposite direction of the carnage, the heat at their backs growing more intense by the second. Naruto couldn't resist stealing a glance over his shoulder. The sight was enough to freeze the blood in his veins. The great Nine Tails was uncoiling, its chakra darkening as it compressed a massive, terrifying sphere of purple energy in front of its maw, a Bijidama. The blast was fired with the force of a falling star, aimed directly at the Hokage monument. But before it could erase the stone faces of the village's history, a massive, intricate seal flared into existence in midair. The black sphere was swallowed whole, vanishing into a void only to reappear miles away in the distant mountains, the subsequent explosion shaking the very foundation of the earth. Dad, Naruto whispered, his heart leaping. Only his father could move an attack of that scale. Moments later, a gargantuan shadow blotted out the moon. Gamabunta, the chief toad, plummeted from the sky with a thunderous roar, pinning the fox to the earth under his colossal weight. Then, in a flash of yellow that cut through the darkness, the fox and the toad vanished together, leaving behind nothing but a cratered wasteland and a sudden, ringing silence. The immediate danger was over. The suffocating pressure of the QB's malice lifted, leaving the air tasting like ozone and smoke. They're safe, Naruto breathed, a shaky laugh escaping his lips. He did it. Dad saved them. He looked at Makoto, Itachi, and Izumi. They were battered and covered in soot, but they were alive. With the Uchiha family secured in a safe zone and his father on the move, Naruto's relief was quickly overtaken by a desperate, driving need. He had to see them. He had to see his mother and the 3 new siblings he had been promised. I have to go, Naruto shouted over the distant sounds of shouting survivors. Naruto, wait. It's not secure. Makoto called out, but she was still leaning heavily on a wall, unable to give chase. Naruto didn't listen. He turned and sprinted toward the last place he had heard the QB's roar, his small legs moving faster than they ever had during his training. He ignored the burning buildings and the rubble, his eyes fixed on the horizon where the yellow flash had disappeared. He was certain he would find them all together, a hero, a mother, and 3 healthy babies, waiting for him to join the family. Part 10 of 14. Naruto ran. He didn't think. He didn't plan. He just ran. The forest tore past him in jagged blurs of shadow and moonlight, branches snapping under his feet as he pushed himself faster than he ever had before. His lungs burned, each breath scraping his throat raw as if he were inhaling fire instead of air. Faster. He had to be faster. His father was out there. His mother. The thought fractured before it could finish. Naruto's foot slipped on loose bark, his body lurching forward as he barely caught himself against a tree trunk. Pain shot up his arm from the impact, but he didn't stop. He couldn't. He pushed off again. Step, stumble. His legs screamed in protest, muscles trembling from overuse. He had already gone past his limit minutes ago. He knew that. Any training session would have ended by now. Any instructor would have told him to stop. But there was no one here to stop him. Only distance. Only fear. Only the echo of that roar still ringing in his ears. Naruto forced chakra into his legs again, harder this time. It surged unevenly, wild and unrefined, spilling through his coils without the careful control Kushina had tried to teach him. Move, he gasped. The chakra flared. Too much. His next step cracked the branch beneath him, sending splinters flying as his balance wavered again. He caught himself, but barely. It wasn't working. He wasn't fast enough. His chest tightened, panic clawing its way up his throat. I'm going to be too late. The thought hit harder than any physical pain. Too late to help. Too late to see them. Too late. Naruto's vision blurred. His pace faltered, and for the first time since he started running, he slowed, just slightly, but enough. His body began to give out, the rhythm breaking as exhaustion flooded in all at once. His legs felt heavy, too heavy. His breaths came in sharp, uneven bursts, his heart pounding so loudly it drowned out everything else. He stumbled again, and this time he dropped to one knee. The forest spun around him. I can't, he whispered, his voice barely audible. His hands clenched against the dirt, fingers digging into the soil as if he could anchor himself there, force himself back up through sheer will alone. But his body didn't listen. It wouldn't move. For a brief, terrifying moment. He was still, and the world didn't wait. Somewhere in the distance, the nine-tails roared again, louder this time, closer. The ground trembled beneath him, a reminder that everything was still happening, with or without him. Naruto's head dropped. No, his parents were out there. his siblings, something inside him twisted sharply. Not fear, not panic, something deeper. I said I'd be there. His grip tightened. The words echoed back to him, not spoken aloud but felt. A promise. Not to them, to himself. Naruto inhaled slowly, shakily. Then again, he closed his eyes, and for the first time since he started running, he stopped trying to force his body forward. Instead, he listened to the wind brushing against the leaves above him, to the way it moved, effortless, constant, unburdened. It didn't struggle. It didn't push. It flowed. Naruto's breathing steadied just slightly. In his mind, he imagined it, not as something outside of him, but something he could follow. No, something he could be. Wind at his feet, light, unbound, moving without resistance. His chakra stirred. This time, it didn't surge wildly. It shifted, spreading outward instead of forcing forward. Naruto's fingers twitched against the ground. A faint current brushed past his ankles. Then again, stronger. The leaves around him rustled, not from the natural breeze, but from something closer, something centered on him. Naruto's eyes snapped open. I can still move. He pushed himself up, slowly at first, unsteady, but standing. His legs still trembled, but the weight felt different now. Lighter, not gone, but carried differently. Naruto took a step. The ground met his foot, but it didn't feel like it used to. There was less resistance, less drag, like something was helping him move. His eyes widened slightly. Another step, then another. Faster. The air shifted around him, subtle at first, then more pronounced as he leaned forward. The chakra at his feet responded, not exploding like before, but flowing, wrapping, guiding. Naruto didn't think about it, didn't question it. He just moved. And this time, the forest didn't fight him. It parted. His steps grew lighter, quicker, his body slipping between trees instead of crashing through them. The strain was still there, but it no longer stopped him. It carried him forward. Faster, faster. Naruto's heart pounded, but not from panic anymore. From momentum, from something new. The sensation was strange, like he wasn't entirely touching the ground, like each step was just barely there before he was already moving again. Like the wind. A faint grin pulled at the corner of his lips despite everything. I'm getting there. The red glow of the battlefield began to bleed through the trees ahead, growing brighter with every step. The air thickened with chakra, heavy and oppressive, but Naruto pushed through it, his movement no longer breaking under the pressure. He leaned forward and surged. A burst of wind kicked up behind him, scattering leaves and dust in his wake as his speed spiked beyond anything he had reached before. Naruto didn't look back, didn't slow, didn't stop. For the first time since he left the Uchiha compound, he felt like he might actually make it in time, and he ran straight toward the heart of the storm. Part 11 of 14, the red glow ahead pulsed like a living thing. Naruto leaned into it, his body moving faster than it ever had before. The forest no longer slowed him. It blurred, warped, slipped past him as if he were no longer bound to it. Each step felt lighter, each breath sharper. The wind curled around his legs, subtle at first, then stronger, responding to something deeper than conscious thought. He didn't understand it, didn't try to. He just ran. I'm close, he muttered, eyes locked forward. The pressure in the air intensified, thick with the nine tails chakra. It pressed against him, heavy and suffocating, but Naruto pushed harder, forcing his body through it. One more push. Just one. His foot came down, and everything changed. The moment his sandal touched the branch beneath him, the chakra at his feet collapsed inward, then detonated outward in a violent burst. A deafening boom split the forest. Wind erupted in all directions, tearing leaves from branches and snapping smaller limbs clean. Off their trunks, the tree beneath him splintered instantly, unable to withstand the force. Naruto's eyes widened. What? The explosion didn't push him back. It launched him, upward. His body shot into the sky like a projectile, the ground vanishing beneath him in an instant. The air screamed past his ears as he rocketed higher and higher, completely out of control. I. He couldn't stop, couldn't turn. The wind he had just begun to understand now roared wildly around him, no longer flowing, but exploding, surging in chaotic bursts that only fed his momentum. The forest became a distant blur below. The sky opened above him. For a split second, there was silence. Weightlessness. Naruto's stomach dropped as he realized exactly what had just happened. I messed up. Then gravity answered. Hard. The upward force died as quickly as it had come, leaving him suspended at the peak for the briefest moment before his body began to fall. Fast. Too fast. Wind tore past him as he plummeted back toward the earth, his limbs flailing as he tried, and failed to stabilize himself. Think. But there was no time. No control. Only speed. And then something moved in his path. A blur. Dark. Fast. Naruto barely had time to register it before impact. The collision knocked the air from his lungs in an instant. GHK. His body slammed into something solid, warm, but unyielding, arms instinctively wrapping around it as the force of their combined momentum sent them spinning through the sky. Naruto clung tightly, fingers digging into fabric as panic surged through him. Don't fall. Don't let go. Don't. The spinning slowed just enough for his vision to clear. Blonde hair whipped across his face as he looked up and froze. Old man, Hiruzen Sarutobi stared back at him, equally stunned. For a split second, neither of them spoke. The wind howled around them, dragging them forward as their trajectory shifted violently. No longer a straight fall, but a wide, arcing path through the air. Naruto's sudden impact had knocked Hiruzen off course completely, redirecting his descent and sending both of them hurtling toward the battlefield at an entirely different angle. Naruto tightened his grip instinctively, pressing himself closer as another gust of wind buffeted them midair. I didn't mean to, he shouted over the roar. But Hiruzen didn't answer immediately. His eyes were sharp now, focused, calculating. Not on Naruto. On what had just happened. That force. That wind. It hadn't been random. It had come from a boy now, clinging to him for dear life. So it was you, Hiruzen muttered under his breath. Naruto blinked, confused, but before he could respond, the battlefield came into view. The ground below was shattered, scorched, and burning. The massive form of the nine-tailed fox dominating the landscape like a living disaster. Its chakra bled into the air, thick and suffocating. They were heading straight toward it. Fast. Hiruzen's expression hardened instantly. No time. No questions. His hand moved to his back, gripping the staff secured there. Hold on tight, Naruto, he barked. Naruto didn't need to be told twice. He locked his arms tighter around Hiruzen's chest, bracing himself as best as he could. Hiruzen pulled the staff free in one smooth motion. Enma, extend. The weapon surged with chakra, lengthening rapidly as Hiruzen twisted midair, positioning himself between Naruto and the ground. They were still falling, still fast, but now they had control. Hiruzen drove the staff downward, aiming directly at the nine tails as the distance between them vanished in seconds. Extend. The staff shot forward with explosive force, striking with a thunderous crack that echoed across the battlefield. The sudden extension caught their momentum, redirecting it into a sweeping arc rather than a deadly crash. The violent descent softened, shifted, controlled. Wind roared past them as they slid along the length of the extended staff. Their fall transformed into a high-speed glide. Naruto's grip didn't loosen for even a second. Below them, the nine tails roared. Above them, the sky burned red. And for the first time since this all began, Naruto wasn't just chasing the battlefield. He had arrived in it. Part 12 of 14 flashback to Hiruzen's POV. The forest blurred into streaks of green and shadow as Hiruzen Sarutobi pushed his aging body far beyond its limits. Each step wasn't a step, it was a calculated burst of chakra. His sandals barely touched the bark of the trees before he launched again, hands flashing through seals between breaths that came sharper and thinner with every passing second. Earth-style, rising pillar. A slab of stone erupted from the ground ahead of him, angled just right. Hiruzen hit it at full speed, using the incline to launch himself higher into the canopy. The moment his feet made contact, his hands were already moving again. Wind release, gale burst. The air detonated behind him, a violent explosion of compressed wind that shoved him forward like an arrow loosed from a bow. The trees cracked and bent under the force, leaves scattering in a chaotic wake. Faster. He had to be faster. The nine-tails chakra pulsed in the distance like a malevolent heartbeat, each surge heavier than the last. Even from miles away, it pressed against his senses, thick and suffocating. Konoha was being torn apart, and he was late. Hiruzen's jaw tightened as he twisted midair, landing sideways on a tree trunk before launching again. His chakra control was precise, practiced over decades, but his body was not what it once was. Not yet, he muttered under his breath. His hands formed another set of seals, quicker this time, more desperate. Fire style, propulsion flame. A burst of fire ignited behind him, not as an attack, but as thrust. The explosion kicked him forward violently, faster than before, but rougher. Less controlled. Too rough. His foot hit the next branch at the wrong angle. Just slightly. But at this speed, slightly was everything. The moment his weight shifted, he knew. His balance broke. Hiruzen's body twisted off course, momentum dragging him sideways instead of forward. His shoulder clipped a tree trunk with a dull, jarring impact, sending a shock through his entire frame. The world lurched. No, he tried to correct it, force chakra to his feet, reach for another jutsu, but his timing was gone. The rhythm he had built shattered in an instant. Another tree rushed toward him. Too fast. Too close. His eyes widened as the realization settled in, cold and absolute. This was it. Not a battlefield. Not protecting the village. Not even in sight of the enemy. Just a misstep. A mistake. A body broken against the trees, lost in the forest where no one would find him. A smudge on bark. Unrecognizable. Forgotten. Time slowed. The rushing wind dulled to a distant whisper as his thoughts stretched into something quiet and heavy. He saw it all. The early days, training under Tobarama, the weight of expectation pressed onto his shoulders long before he was ready. The war, the lives lost, the decisions made, the ones he still questioned. Minato's smile, Kushina's fire, the children of the village, their futures. Naruto, a flicker of blonde hair, bright and stubborn. So much potential, so much burden waiting for him. Hiruzen closed his eyes. I'm sorry, he breathed. And then, impact, but not the one he expected. Instead of splintering wood and crushing force, a violent surge of wind slammed into him from below. It wasn't natural. It wasn't random. It was focused, directed. The force struck his back and lifted him. No, launched him upward, tearing him free from his downward spiral. The air roared past him as his body was hurled into the open sky, spinning once before stabilizing under sheer instinct. Hiruzen's eyes snapped open. The forest was beneath him now, far beneath him, and there was weight against his chest. Small, warm, clinging. He looked down. Blonde hair whipped wildly in the wind, bright even against the chaos of the night. Small hands gripped tightly at his robes, knuckles white with effort. Naruto. Hiruzen's breath caught. What? For a split second, confusion overtook everything. The boy was here, in the middle of this. And that wind. That wasn't coincidence. But there was no time to question it. The battlefield was approaching. The air ahead burned red with the nine-tails chakra, the ground scarred and broken where the beast had rampaged. The sheer scale of it dwarfed everything else. The fox's massive form illuminated by destruction and fire. They were falling straight toward it. Hiruzen's expression hardened instantly. No hesitation. No doubt. His hand moved behind his back, gripping the familiar weight strapped there. Enma, he said sharply. The staff came free in one smooth motion. Now, the weapon shifted in his grasp, extending as chakra surged through it. The black staff lengthened rapidly, solid and unyielding, its presence grounding him even in free fall. Hiruzen twisted midair, positioning himself between Naruto and the ground, one arm locking the child securely against his chest. "Hold on," he barked. Whether Naruto heard him or not didn't matter. The ground rushed up to meet them, but Hiruzen didn't slow. He aimed, straight at the nine tails. At the last possible moment, he drove the staff downward. Extend. Enma shot forward with explosive force, the length of the staff increasing dozens of meters in an instant. It struck the nine tails with a thunderous crack, the impact echoing across the battlefield as the extending force redirected their descent. Instead of crashing, they arced. The staff bent their trajectory, converting the fall into a sweeping glide. The violent momentum softened into controlled motion as Hiruzen rode the extension, guiding them safely down along its length. Wind howled around them, but the impact never came. When they finally slowed, Hiruzen landed lightly atop the extended staff, still holding Naruto close. Below them, the nine tails roared, shaking the ground. Hiruzen exhaled slowly, steadying himself. Alive. Still alive. He glanced down at the boy in his arms, eyes narrowing slightly. Not in suspicion, but in realization. Yugi murmured. Whatever had just happened, it wasn't luck, and it wasn't over. Part 13 of 14, The Clearing, was a nightmare of scorched earth and suffocating red chakra. Hiruzen Tsurutobi, the third Hokage, stood at the center of the wreckage, his legendary staff held firm after a thunderous entrance that had momentarily pinned the thrashing fox to the ground. Naruto stood just behind him, his small frame trembling, his eyes wide as he took in the sight of his parents. Minato and Kushina were unrecognizable. They weren't the glowing icons of the village anymore. They were broken, their chakra levels flickering like dying candles. Minato, Hiruzen barked, his voice cutting through the roar of the wind with a commanding authority. What is the plan? Speak now. I have to seal it. Minato rasped, his lungs burning. The Reaper Death Seal. I'll take the soul with me and split the chakra into the twins. No, Minato, don't you dare. Kushina screamed, her voice cracking as she clutched her newborn children to her chest with one hand while the other gripped the blood-soaked grass. Put it back in me. I'm an Uzumaki. I could take it back to the grave with me. Please, don't leave our children alone. Kushina, stop. Minato begged, tears mingling with the grime on his face. If you do that, you die instantly. If I do this, you can stay. You can raise them. You can give them the life I won't be able to. Please live for them. Hiruzen's eyes swept the area, his heart sinking as he realized a presence was missing. Where is Buwako? He asked, his voice low. Minato's head bowed. The masked man, he killed her. He killed her before he ripped the fox out. The news hit Hiruzen like a physical blow. His wife was gone. In that moment of agonizing grief, a cold, clear resolve settled over the old shinobi. He looked at Naruto, then at the desperate young couple before him. Naruto had unknowingly saved his life today by redirecting him upwards. Now, the debt of a lifetime would be settled. As Minato reached for the final hand sign to sacrifice his soul, Hiruzen moved with a speed that belied his age. A swift, precise strike to the back of the neck sent Minato crashing into unconsciousness. Lord Third, what are you doing? Kushina gasped, catching her husband's limp body. It is a parent's duty to protect their children, Hiruzen said, his voice echoing with the weight of generations. It is the duty of the old to protect the young, and it is the duty of the Hokage to live and die for his people. It is not Minato's time to die, Kushina. It is mine. The air turned ice cold as the spectral form of the Shinigami manifested behind the professor. As the soul-stealing arm reached out, Hiruzen turned his gaze toward the shaking 6-year-old boy. Naruto, Hiruzen said softly, yet urgently. Are you willing to bear this burden for your younger siblings? If I seal a part of this malice within you, they can grow up without the weight of the fox. Naruto looked at the terrifying, ghostly entity and the monstrous red beast pinned before him. He thought of his mother's screams and the blood on the grass. His throat closed up. His legs felt like lead. He was terrified, smaller and more helpless than he had ever felt in his life. He slowly shook his head no, tears streaming down his face. Hiruzen didn't scold him. He simply gave a sad, understanding nod. I see. With a final, heroic surge of chakra, Hiruzen completed the seal. He split the Kyuubi's power in two, spiraling the yang half into Menma and the yin half into Mito. The effort drained the last of his life force. As the Shinigami claimed its price, Hiruzen slumped forward, his fading eyes finding Naruto one last time. Lead a life that you will not regret, he whispered, the words barely audible over the settling dust. Find people who will love and cherish you. Make friends, protect them, be true to yourself. Find a woman and stay loyal to her even after death. Dream with confidence and embrace life in full. Whatever you choose to do in life, just know, I'm proud of you. The great third Hokage breathed his last, leaving a deafening silence in the clearing. Naruto fell to his knees, sobbing uncontrollably. Hiruzen had intended those words to be a blessing, a guide for a young boy's future. But to Naruto, they felt like a curse. He looked at his unconscious father and his grieving mother, then at the two infants who now bore the power he had been too afraid to take. The guilt began to rot his heart from the inside out. He hated himself for his cowardice. He had stood by while his sensei died, and in his mind, he was no longer a son or a brother. He was just a boy who had been in the way. Part 14 of 14. The 6 years that followed the Kyuubi attack were a slow, agonizing erosion of Naruto's place in the Namake's household. At first, he told himself it was duty. The village was a skeleton of its former self, and his father was the architect of its resurrection. His mother was the anchor for two Jinchūriki and a dual contract prodigy. He understood that a Hokage's time belonged to the people. But as the years bled together, the duty excuse began to taste like ash. It was Naruto. He knocked over the vase while practicing his clumsy footwork. Minami chirped, her voice sweet and innocent. At 6 years old, she already moved with the confidence of the slug princess's apprentice. Kushina didn't even look up from the scroll she was helping Mito decipher. Naruto, honestly, you're 12 now. You should be more careful around your siblings' training space. Go back to your room and finish the legal treatise I gave you. Naruto didn't defend himself. He just stood in the hallway, a ghost in his own home. He looked at his mother, then at Menma and Mito, who were glowing with a faint, golden hum of Kurama's chakra. Mom, Naruto said, his voice straining to stay even. Can I train with you guys today? Just for an hour? I've been practicing the spear forms Lord Third taught me. Kushina's expression softened, but it was the kind of softness one gave to a persistent shadow. Naruto, honey, not today. You need to focus on your studies. You're the eldest. You need to understand the laws and the administration. Menma and Mito have to be prepared to hold the burden that has been placed upon them. It's a matter of village safety. The word burden felt like a kunai to the chest. Naruto winced, his mind flashing back to the cold night in the clearing, to the moment he had shaken his head and let Hiruzen die. Was this his punishment? Was every, not today, a silent reminder that he had been too weak to take that burden himself? Tell you what, sport, Minato added, stepping into the room with a tired but practiced smile. We'll do some one-on-one training tomorrow. Just you and me. I'll teach you that flicker transition you've been asking about. Tomorrow, Naruto repeated. He had heard that word for 5 years. He knew that tomorrow was a place that didn't exist, a polite fiction his father used to ease his own guilt. As they returned to their family circle, laughter erupting as Menma accidentally sparked a bit of red chakra, Naruto, turn away. He walked past the stack of books Kushina had left for him, dry, dusty volumes on village bureaucracy, and didn't even glance at them. He closed his eyes and summoned the memory of Hiruzen. He remembered the steam rising from a bowl of Ichiraka ramen and the rough, calloused hands of the old man guiding his grip on the bow staff. Hiruzen had been the only one who didn't look at him and see a disappointment or a legal air. That must be why they don't believe in me, he thought, a bitter, twisted comfort blooming in his chest. It isn't that they don't want me. They just know I can't handle it. I proved that when I let him die. He grabbed his spear and slipped out the back window, moving silently through the trees. He didn't head for the academy or the public grounds. He headed for his secret clearing, a jagged patch of earth hidden by overgrowth. He began to strike, the steel of his spear whistling through the air with a desperate, frantic speed. He would train until his muscles screamed and his lungs burned. He would train until he was no longer the boy who was in the way. Because deep down, Naruto knew that one day someone would need him, and he promised his sensei's ghost that next time he wouldn't say no.
That's it for today. Remember to show your support to the creator of this story if you enjoyed it. If you would like more parts of the story to be uploaded, leave a comment and subscribe to get notified when the story continues. Bye-bye for now, and I hope that you all have a wonderful rest of your day.